New York in early autumn hums like a restless heart. The streets of the Lower East Side are alive with neon reflections, taxi horns, and the low murmur of late-night diners. For Elise Langdon, 30, a senior UX designer at a tech startup, life in the city had always been her canvas, unpredictable, vibrant, hers to paint. She shared a sunny walk-up apartment with her boyfriend of 4 years, Miles Corbin, 33. A composed, introspective high school history teacher with a quiet presence that steadied her creative chaos. And then there was Drew Maddox, her closest friend since college. A music producer with a soft drawl and an easy laugh, Drew had weathered every heartbreak, job switch, and quarter-life crisis with her. He was comfort. He was safe. The lines had always been clear. Elise loved Miles. Drew was family. But lately it felt like the two worlds she balanced so carefully were colliding, not in fireworks, but in tension sharp and suffocating. Miles never said it outright, but Elise saw it in his quiet glances, the way he hesitated whenever Drew's name lit up her phone. The jealousy that once felt beneath him had crept into their home like damp air under the door. Elise told herself it was just a phase, that Miles would trust her, that she would never have to choose. It started with moments so small Elise nearly missed them. A pause before Miles answered when she mentioned grabbing drinks with Drew, the way he'd offer to pick her up afterward, even though he never used to, or the way his smile tightened when Drew sent her a voice note mid-dinner. He just needs space, she told herself, even though Miles never actually said that. His silence stretched longer each time his tone clipped, retreating behind books or lesson plans like they were shields. Then one evening after dinner, lukewarm takeout, eaten in near silence, Miles broke the stillness. "Elise," he said, not looking up from his tea, "I need you to stop talking to Drew, or at least take a break." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elise blinked, confused. "You're serious?" Miles nodded. "I've tried to be okay with it, but it's too much. The texts, the phone calls. I feel like I'm always in second place." Elise's first reaction was disbelief. Her second was anger. "Are you jealous?" she asked, her voice rising. "Because that's what it sounds like. Insecure and jealous." Miles didn't yell. He didn't slam doors or call her names. He just got up, walked into the bedroom, and packed a bag. When he passed her on the way out, he said only this: "I'm not competing anymore." The door clicked shut behind him, but its echo stayed. The silence that followed was deafening. Elise stood there in the hallway, arms crossed, expecting, hoping he'd come back. Any second now. Miles had always been the steady one, the one who came back after an argument with takeout and a quiet apology. But not this time. She stared at the closed door, numb. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart on screen. She opened their shared location app, not something she checked often, but tonight it felt necessary. A ping. He was downtown, a hotel. The realization settled like a stone in her stomach. The next day, she tried to carry on. Emails, client calls, drafts for the fashion campaign due Monday. She answered messages with her usual upbeat tone. But behind the scenes, every noise in the hallway made her flinch. Every vibration of her phone made her heart leap with false hope. Nothing from Miles. Just silence. She texted, "Once. Can we talk?" Please, no response. By evening, that silence had transformed into something worse: reflection. She replayed the conversation over and over, his tone, her words, insecure and jealous. The phrase burned now. At the time, it had felt justified. But maybe that was the problem. She hadn't asked him why it bothered him. She hadn't asked anything, just accused, dismissed, and now she was alone. Elise woke the next morning feeling like she hadn't slept at all. The apartment felt different, emptier, colder. Even with the early winter sun streaming through the blinds, the place seemed dimmer somehow. Miles's absence was like a physical weight in the room pressing against her chest. His toothbrush still sat in the holder. His hoodie still hung over the chair in the kitchen. It was all there, but he wasn't. The guilt hit in waves, sudden and sharp. She remembered the way his expression had shifted that night, first hurt, then resolve. And then the sound of the door closing behind him. Final. Definitive. What bothered her most wasn't just that he'd left. It was that he hadn't even tried to argue. Miles didn't yell, he didn't storm off, but he also didn't beg to be understood. She called him twice, left one voicemail. Just a soft, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said what I did. I miss you," but no reply. When Jules, her best friend and coworker, stopped by to check in, Elise opened the door looking like a shell of herself. Jules raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." "What happened? Everything?" Elise said quietly, her voice brittle. They sat in the kitchen, coffee between them. Elise told her everything, how Miles had asked her gently but firmly to set some boundaries with Jackson, how she'd rolled her eyes and called him insecure, how he'd packed a bag and left without a fight. Jules didn't interrupt. She just listened, frowning slightly. "And now I'm the villain." Elise finished, hugging her knees to her chest. "No," Jules said carefully. "But you might have handled it wrong. That stung." "You think I'm in the wrong?" I think Jules said slowly, "that maybe you weren't listening, like really listening." Miles isn't the type to just lose it over nothing. And you and Jackson, you've been close. Close enough that if I were dating you, I'd have questions too. Elise looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "Yeah," Jules said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "But maybe you did anyway." Elise sat with that, let it sink in. She thought about the late-night messages with Jackson, the way she'd vented about Miles, how she'd ignored his unease and dismissed it with sarcasm. It hadn't been just about trust, it had been about respect, and maybe she hadn't given him enough. The next day, she decided to do something. Not fix it. That seemed impossible right now. But face it. Face herself. She opened her journal. Why did I call him insecure? Why did I protect Jackson, but not the man I live with? The answers weren't pretty, but they were honest, and maybe she thought that was the first real step forward. 2 days passed, still no word from Miles. Elise kept checking her phone like a reflex. Her heart jumped at every buzz, only to sink again when it was just a calendar reminder or spam email. She didn't hear from him, not even a read receipt on her last message. It was as if he'd vanished. The silence was maddening. So she did what she always did when she didn't want to face things. She buried herself in work. Deadlines, mock-ups, client calls, her hours disappeared into Illustrator layers and Pantone palettes. But every time her cursor hovered near the name Miles on her contact list, the weight returned. Jules noticed it too. "You're trying so hard not to feel anything. It's exhausting just watching you," she said during a coffee break. "I'm fine," Elise lied. Jules gave her a look. Later that night, Elise found herself scrolling back through old texts from Miles. The messages were simple: home in 10, grabbed your favorite tie. Don't forget your 9 a.m. call tomorrow, but they were full of care. He hadn't been flashy with affection, but he'd shown up in 100 small ways, and somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing that. Instead, she'd made space for someone else. Jackson. Her thoughts drifted to him, his name sitting like a thorn in her throat. Jackson had been a constant since college, charming, funny, and endlessly supportive. He was the guy she could text at 1 a.m. with a dumb meme or vent about work stress, and he'd always respond. But lately his tone had shifted, compliments lingered longer than necessary, his jokes turned flirtier, and Elise, though she'd never acted on it, hadn't exactly shut it down either. Had she been naive, or did part of her enjoy the attention? She thought about the night Miles asked her to block Jackson. "It's not about control," he'd said. "It's about boundaries. About making me feel like I matter." She'd rolled her eyes, called him insecure, as if loyalty was measured by who laughed at her texts the hardest. That night she opened her messages with Jackson. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. "I think we need to take a break from talking." She typed it, then deleted it. Typed it again. Hit send. Seconds later, the reply came. "Wow, so he got to you after all." Her stomach twisted. "No, I got to me." She blocked his number. It wasn't about punishing Jackson. It was about taking responsibility for the space she'd allowed him to occupy. Space that had belonged to someone else. She stared at the screen, the silence that followed somehow louder than anything. Miles might not come back, but for the first time in a long time, Elise felt like she'd made the right move. Not for him, not even for them, but for herself. The third night alone was the hardest. Elise sat in the dim glow of their living room, a half-drunk glass of Cabernet in hand, the silence of the apartment pressing against her like a weighted blanket. The place was still full of Miles, his mug on the counter, his book half-read on the coffee table, the faint scent of cedar wood from his shampoo lingering on the throw pillow. But he wasn't here, and his absence rang louder than any words ever could. She replayed their last fight over and over, not just the words, but the moments that preceded them. How his voice cracked when he asked if she still respected him, how she'd scoffed and turned away, too caught in her pride to see the pain in his eyes. He wasn't asking to be her only friend. He was asking to be her priority. The difference sat like a stone in her chest now. A message popped up from Jules. You okay? Need company. Elise hesitated, then replied, no, I need to sit with this. She needed to feel the discomfort, the shame, the quiet. She'd spent so long pushing feelings aside or justifying them that she'd forgotten what it was like to actually face them. And now the cost of that avoidance sat heavy in every corner of the apartment. She pulled out her journal, something she'd ignored for months, and opened to a blank page. What part of this was mine? It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was a challenge. And slowly the words began to flow. I didn't listen when he said he felt second. I dismissed his boundaries as insecurity. I kept someone close who blurred the lines of friendship and let him stay in the shadows. I didn't lie with my words, but I did with my silences. I made Miles feel replaceable when all he ever wanted was to feel chosen. Tears spilled freely now, not the kind born from heartbreak, but the kind born from self-recognition. The kind that hurt because they meant something. She wrote for over an hour, pouring out everything she couldn't bring herself to say to his face. When she finally looked up, the room felt different. Still quiet, but not as heavy. Maybe this was what growth felt like, not loud declarations or dramatic apologies, but quiet, steady confrontation with the truth. She didn't know if Miles would come back, but for the first time since he left, Elise stopped trying to rewrite the past and started owning it. And somewhere in the middle of that mess, she found a thread of clarity to hold on to. The following morning, Elise woke up to the emptiest bed she'd ever known. The sheets still held the faint outline of where Miles used to sleep, and for the first time she didn't brush her hand over it. She let the hollow space be. She needed the reminder. The apartment felt unusually still. She didn't turn on music, didn't scroll through social media, just moved through the morning in silence, making coffee, folding the throw blanket, feeding the cat. Each act strangely grounding, each a ritual of rebuilding. By noon, Elise found herself standing outside the studio where Miles taught editing workshops. She hadn't meant to come. It was like her body just took her there. A mix of hope and guilt tied together in a loose knot under her ribs. But she didn't go in. She stood across the street, just out of sight, watching through the large windows as Miles leaned over a student's screen, nodding thoughtfully, that gentle focus she once fell in love with so vividly clear in his every move. He looked tired, but peaceful. She'd always told herself he needed her, that she was the one who grounded him. But standing here now, Elise realized how backwards she had it. Miles had been her anchor, not the other way around, and she'd let that anchor drift. Back at home, a message lit up her screen, from Jules. Just had coffee with Taryn, she heard from Miles. He's okay, just not ready to talk. The lump in Elise's throat tightened. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt raw. Still, she replied, I'm glad. He deserves peace. That night, she began writing again, not in her journal, but a letter. Not to win him back, not to plead or manipulate, but to lay it all bare. She didn't know if she'd ever send it, but she wrote like it mattered. Miles. I made you feel like a placeholder, like trust was something you had to earn every day while I handed it out freely to others. I didn't mean to, but I did. And for that, I'm sorry. Truly. You asked for loyalty, not possession. For honesty, not perfection. And I gave you fear, deflection, pride. I see that now. I see you now. And I understand why you had to leave. I just hope that somewhere down the road you'll remember the parts of us that were beautiful and know that I'm doing the work to be worthy of that kind of beauty again. She folded the letter gently and placed it in her desk drawer. For the first time, she wasn't writing to fix anything. She was writing to face it. Days turned into weeks. The ache didn't fade, but it began to change shape, less like a jagged wound, more like a quiet pulsing scar that reminded Elise of what she'd lost and why. She poured herself into work, stayed late at the agency, started biking to clear her head. She even stopped texting Tyson. Not because Larry had asked her to not, because she felt forced, but because she wanted to. Because for the first time, she understood the weight of boundaries, the value of trust. And then one rainy Thursday, her phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen in weeks. Miles. Her heart leapt and dropped in the same breath. Hands shaking, she answered. "Hey," came his voice, steady but guarded. "Hey," she whispered back. A pause. "Then I got your letter." Silence stretched between them, like a wire pulled tight. "I didn't expect anything," she said. "I just needed to say it." "I know," Miles replied. "That's why I read it twice." They agreed to meet at the Botanical Garden in Prospect Park, a place they used to walk through on weekends when everything was simpler. Elise wore the scarf Miles had given her last Christmas. He showed up with a quiet look in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. They walked without speaking, at first. The rain had stopped, leaving the world soft and glistening. Then finally he broke the silence. "I spent so long trying to hold everything together," he said. "Trying to believe we were okay, even when I felt like I was disappearing in the background of your life." Elise looked at him, really looked. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way, but I did, and I'm sorry." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't perfect either. I let things slide, because I thought love meant patience. But it also means speaking up, drawing lines when something hurts. I should have told you earlier before it turned into resentment." They sat on a bench beneath an arching tree, the last of the golden leaves drifting to the ground. "I've been in therapy," she said, "trying to understand why I pushed away the one person who always showed up for me." He turned to her, something soft in his expression. "I've been going, too. Figuring out why I stayed so long without saying how much it hurt." They didn't talk about getting back together. That wasn't what this was. This was healing. This was understanding. This was two people finally facing the truth without armor. Before they parted, Elise reached into her coat and handed him a small envelope. "I wrote you another letter," she said, "but this one, it's not about the past. It's about what I hope I can become." He held it carefully, like it was made of glass. As he walked away, Elise didn't cry. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she had to chase anyone. She felt steady. Ready. The following days after their meeting at the Botanical Garden were quiet, but in a healing way. Elise didn't wait by the phone anymore. She didn't check Miles's social media or craft imaginary conversations in her head. Instead, she focused on what she could control, her own growth. She kept going to therapy. Every session peeled back another layer of defensiveness and denial. She started journaling each morning, no longer trying to write a version of herself she wanted to believe existed, but telling the truth. Raw, messy, real. She also decided to be honest with Tyson. It took weeks to find the courage, but one evening she asked to meet, at the same cafe, where they'd first had coffee in college. He was hesitant, but agreed. Tyson arrived with that familiar, easy confidence, though his eyes were more cautious now. Elise didn't waste time. "I blamed you," she said, hands clasped tightly around her tea. "When things got hard, I used our friendship as a shield, something to point at when I didn't want to look at what I was doing wrong." He nodded slowly, not interrupting. "You were never the problem. I was. I didn't know how to set boundaries or how to be present in a relationship without needing someone else to validate me on the side. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to defend yourself." Tyson exhaled deeply. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I hated being caught in the middle. I cared about you both, but it felt like I was always one text away from being the bad guy." "I know," Elise said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't deserve that." They talked for hours. Not about rekindling the past, or pretending things would go back to the way they were, but about moving forward. Differently, honestly, with boundaries. By the time they hugged goodbye, it was clear their friendship would never look the same, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was supposed to evolve too. That night, Elise sat on her rooftop, the city stretching endlessly around her. The skyline didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt like possibility. She opened her phone not to scroll, not to distract herself, but to set a reminder. A year from today. She titled it, "Check in with the woman you've become." Not the woman Larry loved. Not the friend Tyson missed. But the version of herself who had finally stopped running. The version who stood still long enough to grow roots. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The apartment was quieter than it had ever been, but for the first time, Elise didn't fear the silence. She welcomed it. It was in that stillness she found clarity. No longer preoccupied with the need to prove herself right or justified, she began to examine the last few years with a level of honesty she had once found terrifying. Her relationship with Larry, she realized, hadn't ended the night he walked out. It had been slowly unraveling. In all the moments, she refused to listen, refused to compromise, refused to admit that someone else's hurt was real, even when it made her uncomfortable. The friendship with Tyson, too, had existed under the illusion of permanence, safe and unchanging. But even the strongest bonds can erode if we lean on them too heavily without tending to them with care. Elise didn't need to rewrite history to understand it better. She just needed to stop running from the version of herself she had been and take responsibility for her part in it all. That meant more than apologizing. It meant change. It meant choosing discomfort when it served growth instead of comfort that enabled stagnation. It meant pausing when she wanted to defend herself. It meant checking her intentions before texting someone late at night. It meant asking, not assuming. And above all, it meant telling the truth even when it made her look bad. She no longer defined her worth by whether Larry forgave her or if Tyson stayed in her life. This time she was building something not to win people back, but to make peace with herself. One evening, Elise stood by the window of her apartment, looking out over a rainy Manhattan skyline. A new journal sat on the table behind her, its first page already filled with a promise. No more half-truths. No more convenience dressed up as compassion. If I'm going to love, it will be with my whole heart, or not at all. She didn't know what would happen next. But for once that uncertainty didn't scare her, it gave her hope. 2 weeks later, Elise took a step she once would have seen as weakness. She sent a final message to Tyson. No pressure, no expectations, just truth. I don't know where we stand, but I needed to say this anyway. You were my safe place when everything else felt like chaos. And I took that for granted. I made choices that hurt people I care about. That includes you. I blamed you when I should have owned my part. I'm sorry truly. Whether or not you forgive me, I needed you to know. She didn't wait for a reply. She just hit send and closed her phone. For the first time, the act of apology felt complete on its own. It wasn't about getting anything back. It was about releasing what she had carried for far too long. The weight of unspoken guilt, the fear of being wrong, the pride that once kept her stuck. As the days passed, Elise started to re-enter life. She reconnected with old colleagues, returned to her evening sketching sessions in Washington Square Park, and even joined a small writing workshop downtown. Not to share her story, but to rewrite her voice. In group one night, a woman named Layla read a poem about choosing yourself, even when it hurts. And Elise, sitting near the back, felt her throat tighten, because that's what this had always been about. Larry hadn't left her because he stopped loving her. He left because he finally chose to stop abandoning himself for the sake of their relationship. And now Elise was doing the same. There would be other relationships in her life, some already forming in unexpected places. But none of them would be built on blurred lines and avoided truths. From now on, Elise would ask the hard questions earlier. Speak up before the silence got heavy. Say I was wrong without needing to be cornered into it. She didn't want perfect love. She wanted honest love, the kind that doesn't hide behind old wounds or fragile egos, the kind she was finally learning to give to others and to herself. It wasn't until early spring, as cherry blossoms began softening the harsh edges of the city, that Elise saw Tyson again. It wasn't planned. She was leaving a bookstore in the village, a stack of design magazines under her arm, when she looked up, and there he was just a few feet away, standing at a crosswalk with his headphones in and a coffee in hand. For a heartbeat, she froze. 1,000 words collided in her throat. Should she call out? Should she turn and disappear into the crowd? But then Tyson looked up, and he saw her. There was a flicker in his eyes, surprise, then recognition. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Tyson pulled out his earbuds. "Elise," he said, voice steady but unsure. "Hey," she replied, her voice quiet, cautious. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, just two people with a long, painful history, and nothing to hide behind anymore. The traffic signal changed, but neither of them crossed. "I got your message," Tyson said finally. I needed time. I didn't expect you to respond," Elise said, a nervous smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I just needed to say it," he nodded. "I know, and I appreciated it. I mean that." There was silence again, but it wasn't hostile this time. It was full of unspoken understanding, like both of them knew they couldn't rewrite what had happened, but maybe they could make peace with it. "How have you been?" she asked, genuinely. Tyson chuckled softly. "Getting there. Been working on setting better boundaries. Took a break from always being the guy who fixes everything." "That's good," Elise said, her chest tightening a little. "You deserve that, and you," he asked. She smiled, small but real. "Learning to live with the parts of myself I used to hide. Learning not to run." He looked at her for a long moment. "You look different," he said. Elise tilted her head. "Worse." "No," Tyson said. "Lighter." They didn't hug. They didn't make plans to catch up. They just stood there at the edge of a crosswalk, acknowledging what once was, and quietly accepting that it might never be again, and that was okay. Because some people are meant to grow with you, and some are meant to help you realize you need to grow at all. That evening, Elise returned home to her small apartment in the West Village. No longer the one she had shared with Larry, but her own space now. Clean, quiet, and hers. She lit a candle, brewed a pot of chamomile tea, and curled up on the couch with her journal. The entry she wrote that night came easily fluid and honest, the way truths often are, after you've stopped trying to defend yourself from them. "Dear future me, I hope you never forget what it cost you to grow. Not just the heartbreak, but the discomfort, the guilt, and the radical honesty it required. You hurt people. You betrayed trust. But you chose to face yourself rather than hide behind excuses. That's the bravest thing you've ever done. You learned that loyalty isn't about who you've known the longest, it's about who shows up with integrity. That trust isn't a given, it's built. And that love, real love, demands vulnerability, not performance. You're still learning, still healing, but you're not running anymore. And that in itself is a victory." Elise closed the journal, holding it for a moment against her chest. She wasn't the same woman who once dismissed a partner's fears, who deflected and blamed, who needed everyone to like her, even at the expense of her own clarity. She didn't know if she and Larry would ever cross paths again. She didn't know if Tyson would one day reappear in her life as a friend or remain a closed chapter. But she did know one thing: she would be ready, whatever the future brought. Because now she understood something deeply and irrevocably true. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness from others. It begins the moment you take responsibility for yourself. And in a city like New York, loud, unforgiving, endlessly in motion, that truth was the only solid ground beneath her feet. She turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the city pulse below. She had lost love. She had nearly lost herself. But she'd also found something far more precious, the strength to rebuild from the inside out, and that she now believed was the truest kind of love there is. In today's fast-paced, emotionally complex relationships, especially among young adults in urban centers, like New York, this story delivers a poignant truth. Emotional avoidance can be more damaging than confrontation. At the heart of Sarah's experience lies a lesson about accountability and emotional maturity. She thought she could maintain peace by downplaying her partner's concerns and hiding what she feared would cause tension. But in doing so, she broke the very foundation of trust she hoped to preserve. The story reminds us that trust isn't maintained through silence or half-truths. It thrives in transparency, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Equally important is the realization that past traumas shape present fears. Larry's reaction wasn't rooted in baseless jealousy, but in unresolved pain. Yet Sarah, blinded by defensiveness, dismissed his vulnerability as control. This misstep is a warning to all of us. If we don't make space for our partner's emotional history, we risk repeating it with new scars. Whether you're in a relationship, nurturing a friendship, or repairing family bonds, this story urges us to stop deflecting. Start listening and recognize that healing begins where ego ends. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that growth only comes when we face not just the cracks in our relationships, but the cracks within ourselves. Choose honesty over comfort, empathy over ego, and if someone gives you a chance to understand their pain, don't squander it with silence.